The memory of that day still burned vividly in my mind. The mahogany-paneled office, the contempt in my father's eyes, the way he didn't even bother to rise from his leather chair as he dismantled my life's work. "You're fired, Alexandra," he had said, his voice as cold as winter steel. "You'll never be good enough to run Morgan Pharmaceuticals." 6 months later, I stood before my full-length mirror, adjusting the lapel of my Tom Ford suit. Tonight was the annual pharmaceutical industry gala, the biggest event of the year, and I had a surprise planned for Daddy Dearest. My phone buzzed with a message from my assistant. "Everything's ready, Miss Blake. The press release goes live at 9 p.m. sharp." I smiled, remembering how all of this had begun. After that day in my father's office, I'd done something he never anticipated. I'd called Jerome Wilson, CEO of Wilson Biotech, Morgan Pharmaceuticals' largest competitor. "Your research on the new cancer drug," I told him, "I know why it's failing trials." He laughed at first, but 2 weeks later, when I showed him exactly what his research team had overlooked, he wasn't laughing anymore. He was offering me a job. What my father never understood was that I hadn't spent 15 years at his company merely following orders. I had been learning, watching, analyzing. I knew every strength, every weakness, every secret Morgan Pharmaceuticals tried to bury. The car pulled up to the Grand Meridian Hotel. Camera flashes erupted the moment I stepped out. The reporters weren't here for me. Not yet. They were focused on the usual parade of industry giants. "Miss Blake," a young valet hurried forward. "Mr. Wilson asked me to escort you directly to the main hall." Inside, the ballroom was a sea of tailored suits and designer gowns. I spotted my father immediately, holding court near the center of the room, my older brother, Thomas, standing proudly at his side. They were probably boasting about their latest acquisition, a small research facility in Boston. If only they knew I'd let them have it because its patents were about to expire. "Alexandra." The familiar voice made me turn. It was Sarah, my former assistant at Morgan Pharmaceuticals. I didn't expect to see you here." "Things change," I said, smiling, noticing how her eyes widened at my calm confidence. She had been there that day, watching as security escorted me out of the building. "Your father's been telling everyone you had a nervous breakdown, that you couldn't handle the pressure." "Has he?" I glanced at my watch. 8:59 p.m. "Well, Sarah, in about 5 minutes, he'll have a very different story to tell." I moved through the crowd, accepting glasses of champagne from passing waiters, but never taking a sip. I needed a clear mind for what was coming. Jerome Wilson caught my eye and gave a subtle nod. The old man had been the perfect partner in this venture, ready to step aside and let new blood take over. He understood something my father never did. Adaptation is survival. 8:59 p.m. My father's booming laughter echoed across the room. "Of course, Morgan Pharmaceuticals will be leading the merger discussions. We've been the industry leader for 30 years. I pulled out my phone, watching the seconds tick by. In the corner of my vision, I saw reporters checking their screens, their expressions shifting from boredom to disbelief. 9:00 p.m. The breaking news alert hit every phone at once. The headline read, "Wilson Biotech announces new co-CEO, Alexandra Blake, to lead $12 billion company." The room fell silent. My father's champagne glass slipped from his hand, shattering against the marble floor. Thomas grabbed his phone, scrolling frantically through the news. I stepped into the center of the room, my heels clicking sharply against the floor. Every head turned, every eye locked onto me. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice cutting cleanly through the stunned silence. "I believe some introductions are in order." The silence in the ballroom was electric. The color had drained from my father's face, while Thomas kept glancing between his phone and me, as if his mind refused to accept what he was seeing. "Alexandra," my father finally found his voice, hoarse and strained. "What is the meaning of this?" Before I could respond, Jerome Wilson stepped forward, resting a paternal hand on my shoulder. "Allow me to make this official," he announced to the room. "As of today, I am stepping down as CEO of Wilson Biotech. Alexandra Blake will be assuming full control of operations, effective immediately." The room erupted into hushed chaos. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Phones were raised, recording every second, every reaction. I could almost see the social media headlines writing themselves. "This is impossible," Thomas sputtered. "She's been gone for 6 months. She can't possibly—" "Can't possibly what, brother?" I cut in calmly. "Can't possibly understand the industry? Can't possibly lead a major corporation?" I pulled out my tablet. "Shall we discuss the R37 project?" Thomas's face went white. The R37 project was Morgan Pharmaceuticals' secret weapon, a revolutionary arthritis drug they'd been quietly developing. "How do you know about—" he began. "About how the latest trial showed liver complications?" I finished for him. "Or about how you've been concealing those results from the FDA?" My father stepped forward, his polished business mask snapping back into place. "Alexandra, whatever game you're playing—" "This is no game," Jerome interrupted sharply. "Your daughter has transformed our research division in just 6 months. The cancer drug we were struggling with, she solved it in 2 weeks." Another wave of whispers swept the room. That drug had been the industry's obsession, Wilson Biotech's potential breakthrough that had mysteriously stalled. "But more importantly," I added, "we've just acquired Nexus Pharmaceuticals." The room went completely still. Nexus was the 3rd largest pharmaceutical company in the country, and Morgan Pharmaceuticals had been trying to acquire them for years. "That's not possible," my father growled. "We've been in negotiations with Nexus for months." "Were you?" I smiled, pulling up another document on my tablet. "Interesting, because they signed with us last week. Would you like to see the contract?" Thomas grabbed my father's arm. "Dad, this means they now control 35% of the market." "I finished," I said evenly, "by making Wilson Biotech the largest pharmaceutical company in the country. Or should I say, making us your biggest competitor." The reporters who had been lingering at the edges of the ballroom surged forward, voices overlapping. "Miss Blake, how did you engineer this takeover? Mr. Wilson, why choose Alexandra Blake as your successor? What does this mean for Morgan Pharmaceuticals?" I raised a hand, and the room slowly quieted. All excellent questions, but first I believe my father was just telling everyone about leading merger discussions. I turned to face him directly. "Would you like to revise that statement?" His face shifted from pale to crimson, a vein throbbing at his temple, the same expression he'd worn the day he fired me. "You think this makes you powerful," he hissed, low enough that only those closest could hear. "You think you can just walk in here?" "And actually, Dad," I cut him off, "I just did. And tomorrow morning, when the markets open, everyone will see exactly how powerful I've become." The tension in the room was palpable as I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small USB drive, the same one I had taken from my office the day I was fired. My father's eyes locked onto it, recognition slowly dawning across his face. "You remember this, don't you, Dad?" I held it up. "The drive you accused me of stealing company secrets with. Well, you were half right. I wasn't stealing secrets. I was collecting evidence." Jerome Wilson stepped forward once more. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I may have your attention, there's more to tonight's announcement." Reporters' cameras flashed furiously as he continued. Wilson Biotech isn't just acquiring Nexus Pharmaceuticals, we're also launching a new division focused on ethical pharmaceutical development and fair pricing. My father's composure finally cracked. You wouldn't dare. The Blake Initiative, I announced clearly, watching my father and brother exchange panicked glances. Named after my mother, who died because she couldn't afford the cancer medication that Morgan Pharmaceuticals marked up by 3,000%. The room fell to a deadly silence. Even the reporters stopped writing, sensing the gravity of the moment. That's right, I continued, my voice steady despite the emotion threatening to surface. The same medication that cost $3 to produce, yet was sold for $9,000 per dose. The medication that could have saved her if her own husband's company hadn't chosen profit over people. Thomas stepped forward. Alex, you can't just what? I interrupted. Tell the truth? I turned to the assembled crowd. The Blake Initiative will ensure that life-saving medications are accessible to everyone who needs them. We're starting with cancer treatments, then expanding to other critical drugs. The reporters erupted with questions again, but I kept my eyes on my father. His carefully constructed world was collapsing, and he knew it. You'll destroy the industry, he growled. No, Dad, I said quietly. I'm going to fix it. I nodded to Jerome, who tapped a button on his phone. The massive screens around the ballroom flickered to life, displaying internal Morgan Pharmaceuticals documents, pricing strategies, hidden trial results, buried safety reports over the past decade. My father lunged forward, but security, my security, stepped between us. You ungrateful little... Careful, Dad, I cut him off. The cameras are rolling and your shareholders are watching. As if on cue, his phone began ringing. Mine did too, and Thomas's. The news was spreading, and the market was already reacting in after-hours trading. Miss Blake, a reporter called out, what do you say to those who claim this is just revenge? I smiled, straightening my jacket. This isn't about revenge. It's about responsibility, about doing what's right, something I learned not from my father, but from my mother. I turned back to my father, who suddenly looked old and defeated. You were right about one thing, Dad. I wasn't good enough to run Morgan Pharmaceuticals. I paused. I was better. The room erupted into chaos as more phones began ringing. Morgan Pharmaceuticals' stock was plummeting, Wilson Biotech was soaring, and somewhere I knew my mother was smiling. Now, if you'll excuse me, I addressed the room, I have a company to run and lives to save. As I walked toward the exit, flanked by my executive team, I heard Jerome addressing the crest behind me. The Blake Initiative will launch next month. We expected to revolutionize the industry. I paused at the doorway, glancing back one final time. My father stood alone at the center of the room, his empire collapsing around him. Thomas was already on the phone, most likely with their lawyers, but I wasn't concerned. I had something they never did, a purpose beyond profit. My phone buzzed with a message from my assistant. Your mother's foundation is ready to launch alongside the initiative. I smiled as I stepped into the cool night air. Sometimes the best revenge isn't destroying your enemies. It's becoming everything they said you couldn't be, and then using that power to help others. As my car pulled up, I heard one last question from a reporter. Miss Blake, what's your message to young women in the industry? I turned, knowing my answer would be splashed across headlines by morning. Never let anyone tell you you're not good enough, and when they try to stop you, don't get even, get better. The car door closed behind me, sealing out the chaos. Tomorrow, the real work would begin, but tonight, I had finally proven what I'd always known. Sometimes, being pushed out of the family business is the best thing that can happen to you, because it forces you to build something better.